that the moach is sholet al halev, that the mind or the brain is supposed to rule over the heart. And if you simply translate that statement into the Rambam's terms, we would basically say that the highest koach of the nefesh, which is called the koach hasichli, is supposed to control and direct the koach hamisorer. So remember the five components of the soul. There is the zan, that's the biological. There is the margish, that is the sensory input. There is the medameh, which is memory and imagination. Then there's the misorer, which is the emotion of wanting something or rejecting something. And that really is the whole range of human emotions: anger, disgust, love, desire. And then above everything is the seichel, which is the intellect, which creates and understands the value systems of your life, what is right and what is wrong. And that ultimately can direct the emotions, how you emotionally respond. And of course, once you direct the emotions, you also direct the behaviors, because the behaviors are an outgrowth of desire or repulsion, what I want to do or what I don't want to do. And I act on the basis of my emotion, but ultimately the seichel is that which controls and directs. So the point that needs to be understood is that it does this in two different ways. There is a lower way and a higher way. The lower way is that the intellect controls the emotion by simply controlling it, quite literally, meaning I'm angry, I want to smash this wall. My mind, my intellect can tell me that's not the right thing to do, so even though I'm angry, I'm going to control my fists, so to speak. That's one level of control. But the higher and deeper and ultimately tachlis idea is that you can actually re-educate your emotions and your feelings in positive directions. So instead of saying, I want to smash, this wall or somebody's face, but I'm not going to do it, instead I train myself to be a person who doesn't have this desire to hit people in the face. That's a different meaning of the mind controlling the emotions. And the Rambam says that Pirkei Avos is about re-educating, retraining the midos of a person so that they're not going to be negative midos, but rather the misorer, your yearning will be to do good. So the seichel kind of knows what's good and what's not good. Now that needs education. The seichel needs the input of education, Torah learning, and the like. But then the seichel can be the override or the educator of the midos of the misorer, the various emotional responses that we have to different types of situations, right? So there are two different meanings of hamoach sholed al halev. One is the simple notion of control. The other is the notion of re-education and redirection, which is the goal really of all Musar. All Musar is designed not to simply teach you how to control your Yetzer Hara, although that is absolutely necessary, but also the higher goal of Musar is to re-educate what it is that you desire in life, what it is that you're attracted to, what it is that you're rejecting, right? That you try to change your personality. As I say, even in something like Lashon Hara, the goal is not to bite my tongue. The goal is that I don't have the urge to speak so negatively about people because I look at them in a different way. That's very different than the notion of having to fight the Yetzer Hara at all times. So actually I want to give you a little bit of a drasha on this based on the parsha of not this week. This week we're reading Parshas Chukas, but the week afterwards, the next 2 weeks, we're going to read Parshas Balak. And Balak was the king of Moab, and Balak decides to hire a fellow known as Bilam to curse the Jewish people, because Bilam apparently has quite a reputation that whoever Bilam curses, that curse happens, and that's a special koach. A half curse will travel, and he was known in the world for having that koach of klala. So the Gemara in Brachos says a very interesting thing about Bilam. It says that what was Bilam's secret? What was his secret weapon? So the Gemara in Brachos says that there is a split second, even less than a second, every day in which Hashem has tremendous anger in the world. That's called an Idan Rischa. Idan Rischa is a moment of fury. That's the meaning in Mizmor Shir Chanukah Sabayis LaDavid. There's a statement, Ki rega biapo. God's anger is a rega, is a moment. And it says anybody who could curse in that exact moment of Idan Rischa, the curse is going to be successful because he gets to push the button. Like there's one, fraction of a second a day in which if you push the right button, you can trigger the nuclear war. Bilam knew exactly when that button could be pushed in that way. Now, how long is that moment of anger? Rega kememre, the amount of time it takes to say the word rega is the amount of the rega. How long does it take? You have a stopwatch. Rega, it's less than a second actually. So it's only that idun rischa. And Bilam is yada lechavein es hasha'ah. Bilam knew exactly when that rega was. Now Chazal say there's actually a test. You can know it yourself. And that is, for that rega, the red comb of a rooster turns white in fright. Now it's less than a second, so you're going to miss it. So the Gemara says Rabbi Meir had enemies that he wanted to curse. And he wanted to curse them during that rega of Idan Rischa. So he tied a rooster to his bed, and he just sat there staring at the rooster to try to find out that Idan Rischa. What happened was he fell asleep, and then he realized it is not God's will, it is not Hashem's ratzon that we should tap into the Idan Rischa. Now the truth is I don't understand that at all, because obviously you have to blink, and you could literally miss this in the blink of an eye. So either way, how could Rav Meir be batuach that he could ever have the Idan Rischa? And probably it's not the same time every day, because otherwise he could have done a video camera or whatever it is. He could have known, okay, even if he fell asleep, he knows that 10:15 a.m. is the Zman. But the answer is it changes from day to day to day. So therefore, even if you knew the time, even if you somehow could record the time, you couldn't use it for next time because there's no assurance that would be the right time. Now, just a moment here, just to digress. What's the tachlis? What's the purpose of an Idan Rischa? Like, why did God build into the system a split second or a half a second of fury in the world? So the Svarim say that is the source of Yiras HaOnesh. We know that one of the motivators in Avodas Hashem, albeit the lowest motivator, it's not the highest type of motivation, is that I have a sense of the fear of God, the wrath of God. I better behave or bad things might happen in this world or the next world. So the fact that Hashem puts in that punishment or that fury for a fraction of a second, that is what creates Yiras HaOnesh. My neshama kind of absorbs a certain yira, and that keeps me in line. You need that. That keeps me in line because I absorb the notion that there's a yira in the world, there's an onesh in the world. That keeps me well behaved, at least as a lower motivator. So Bilam knew exactly when this second was, or fraction of a second was, and was able to trigger the curse. So Tosfos asks an obvious question. This amount of time is so short. What type of curse could you utter that would be within this limited amount of time? What could you say? So there are two answers to this question. These are both technical answers. Technical answer number one is, well, as long as you began your curse within the time, even if you finish it later, it counts. You got your hand in the window, so to speak. So the halacha doesn't mean you have to finish the curse, but if you were maschil the klala in the Idan Rischa, even if you're gomer after the Idan Rischa, the klala will take effect. Based on this, some Sifrei Chasidus raise the interesting question. This is not la halacha. They raise the question, which is nogea l'maisa in some Chasidish minyanim. Let's say you begin Zman Tefillah while it's still the permissible Zman of Tefillah, but you're starting so late that by the time you finish Kriya Shema or Shmona Esrei, you're going to be past the Zman. Right? Kriya Shema has a Zman that you have to read the Shema by a certain Zman. Tefillah, Shmona Esrei, has a Zman. You have to finish it before a certain Zman, right? There's a Zman Kriya Shema, Zman Tefillah. Well, what if I began before the time expired, but I didn't finish till after the time expired? Am I Yotze? So some Sifrei Chasidus want to bring a raya. If you see that for a curse, as long as you begin the curse on time, you can finish it afterwards, and it's still effective. Kal v'chomer, when it comes to prayer and Kriya Shema, as long as you begin on time, because after all, we have a saying that God is 500 times more generous when it comes to good things than he is for bad things. What's the proof? The proof is from the Ten Commandments, because it says by Averos, Hashem will punish an Avera until the 4th generation. And yet it says, he will do chesed for the good things you do for the 2000th generation. The ratio of 4 to 2,000 is 1 to 500. So the Gemara says in a number of places, Hashem's generosity and benevolence is 500 times greater than the attribute of punishment. So Memela, the Hasidim want to say, some Hasidim want to say, if we find that God allows a curse to be valid, even though you only started it in the right time and you finished it afterwards, Kal v'chomer, he's going to be generous in allowing Kriya Shema and Tefillah as long as you start. Again, I hasten to add, this is not the halacha, this is just a drasha, I'm sharing with you a cute thought, so to speak. La halacha, you must complete all of Shema before the end of Zman of Shema, and you must complete all of Shmona Esrei before the end of Zman Tefillah. But again, as I say, some use this answer as a heter for that. Of course, even if you used it as a heter, it would only apply if you began in the right Zman. I mean, part of the problem with some Hasidic Sheminyanim is they don't even begin Kriya Shema within the Zman. So even under this heter would not exist at all. Yeah.
Does it have, according to those opinions, would it have to be completely continuous, or can you begin, then not say anything for an hour and then complete?
Are you talking about for davening or cursing? Which one are you referring to?
The davening. The opinions that say
No, that's a separate issue. We're talking about continuous. You began and you just continue. Okay. So now, so that's answer number one. As how could Bilam do an effective curse? The Yidden Ritzcha is so short. Answer: as long as he began, he could then continue as long as he wanted. There's a second answer Tosfos gives, that Bilam did have a curse that he could say within the Yidden Ritzcha, and that is the word kalem. Kalem is spelled with a chaf. Kaf, not kuf. Kaf, lamed mem. Destroy them. Kalem, you could get under the wire. And that's how he was so successful. He knew the exact moment, and he said kalem, and that eradicated everybody. Yeah.
I still don't understand the whole concept. Like Hashem still has he has still has control over them. Like just because he puts the curse in that moment, why does that work?
Well, as I say, this is the mechanism. I mean, Hashem is not being manipulated. Hashem created a mechanism that there is one fraction of a second in the course of a day where the midas hadin is totally strong and it's not mitigated by rachamim. So therefore the curse is going to come in. Now, again, no curse would be effective if somebody had no avera at all. In other words, a curse is effective because it triggers a midas hadin that's not mitigated by rachamim. In midas hadin, unfortunately, virtually everybody is going to be chayav. In other words, we survive only by midas harachamim. So in a moment where there is no midas harachamim, curses could be devastatingly effective. But if there wouldn't be any aveira at all, theoretically, then even a curse could not affect you. Meaning a curse cannot affect you if there's literally nothing in your life for which there's an aveira. But as I say, that is what mathematicians call a null hypothesis, meaning to say everybody has aveiras. So memela in midas hadin, we're going to be in big trouble. Now, here is the thing. There is a beautiful thought from the Chassam Sofer who says the following. Kalem, destroy them, can actually be a Rashi Teva for 3 words. Kaved is liver, Lev, heart, and Mem is Moach, liver, heart, brain. That's what Kalem is. And here is the thing. You know that Chazal teach us that Bilam was, in some ways, as great a prophet as Moshe Rabbeinu. Do you remember the famous teaching that the Umos HaOlam said to God? Of course, we never know what that means. I mean, did they say to God? When did that? But there was a taina. The angels in Shemayim said to God, if you would give us a prophet as great as Moshe Rabbeinu, we too would have become your servants. We too would have served Hashem. The Jews had a Moshe Rabbeinu. Give us a Moshe Rabbeinu, and we'll do great. So Hashem said, okay, I will give you a prophet as great as Moshe Rabbeinu. And he gave them Bilam. And obviously they continued to sin. Now, let's ponder this a little bit. L'chaira, they're saying, if you give us a Moshe Rabbeinu, we'll do great. So Hashem gives them a Bilam? Hashem didn't give them a Moshe. Hashem gave them a Bilam. Hashem gave them a Rasha. Don't they still have a taina? If you would have given us a righteous prophet, we would have done great. So here is the thing that's interesting. Moshe didn't start off as a tzaddik, and Bilam didn't start off as a Rasha. God took 2 people, both of whom were supremely gifted with the powers of prophecy. Moshe and Bilam, they kind of got zapped. God chose them to reach the highest levels of prophecy that a human being could achieve. He gave Moshe to the Jewish people. He gave Bilam to the nations of the world. Meaning, Hashem gave the Jewish people the same thing he gave to the nations of the world. The difference that emerged between Moshe and Bilam is, how did they respond to the gift of prophecy that Hashem gave them? Imagine you wake up one day, like with superpowers. You're like a Superman, at least in a mental sense. You can declare, a curse and people drop dead. You can declare blessings and people win the lottery. You create, you destroy. That could go to your head, right? Basically, you have this power to manipulate reality. What happened with Bilam was, Bilam became a Rasha as a result of his prophecy. He became convinced of his power, of his amazing abilities to manipulate reality. He can look at somebody would die. He could confer blessing as well. That's what Balak said, you can bless as well as curse. So as a result, Bilam became consumed with his arrogance, with his power, with his seeming invincibility. And he became what he became. Moshe Rabbeinu was the opposite. Knowing that everything came from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Moshe remained, and perhaps became as a result, the most humble of all people. So the taina that the Umos have, if you would have given us a prophet as great as Moshe, we would have been good, is not negated by Hashem giving them Bilam, because there is Bechira in the world. Hashem gave the Jewish people a great man, and Hashem gave the Umos HaOlam a great man. The one great man was Makalkel himself by Bechira, and another great man elevated himself by Bechira. So, similar to Korach in some ways, Bilam fits the definition of what you might call a Greek tragedy. Forgive me for mixing the metaphors, right? The Greek definition of tragedy as formulated by Aristotle is not when a building falls on you, that's a sad event. But tragedy is when you are destroyed by a chisaron, by a flaw that exists within you. And therefore, tragedy always presupposes greatness. Right? If a person is not great, if a person is mediocre and therefore does mediocre things, okay. But tragedy is when there's greatness side by side with a flaw within the person. That's tragic because there was so much promise. There was so much greatness. Bilam is a tragic figure because Bilam had all of these kochos that were equal to Moshe Rabbeinu. But Bilam was consumed. Pirkei Avos actually says that, what are the three attributes of Bilam? He says, ayin ra, an evil eye, which means he was jealous of anyone else's accomplishments. He had nefesh rechava, he was a Baal Taiva who wanted money and power. Ruach gavoa, arrogance. This actually corresponds in a different way to the three negatives in Pirkei Avos that take a person out of the world. Kina, jealousy. That corresponds to, in the case of Bilam, called ayin ra'ah. Ayin ra'ah is kind of a jealousy. The second is taiva, a lust for pleasures. That corresponds to what is called nefesh rechava. And the third is kavod, a desire for honor. That is called ruach gavoa, right? So Chazal, when they describe the three midos of Bilam, use a different vocabulary. Ayin ra, nefesh rechava, ruach gavoa, but they correspond b'diuk to kina, taiva, kavod. So what do you see with Bilam? Bilam is a man of greatness who is controlled by the negative emotions of kina, taiva, v'kavod. So what makes Bilam even more tragic is he was smart enough not to be oblivious of this. Sometimes a person can live a life of distraction. I can live a life of kina, taiva, v'kavod, I don't even know that something's wrong with this picture. And that may be a little bit of a comfort. That's the old saying, ignorance is bliss. Right? Now, if you don't know what's going on, so at least you can have the illusion that your life is okay. Bilam was too great for that. Bilam understood he was essentially a train wreck. Bilam knew his greatness, and Bilam knew that he was hijacked by these uncontrollable impulses that he felt at least he could not direct. Kina, taiva, v'kavod. So this is a long explanation of the Chassam Sofer. He doesn't explicitly say all of this, but I'm adding a lot of supplementary interpretation. So when Bilam wants to curse somebody, the biggest curse he could think of is, may you be like me. May you be a person whose emotions control their mind instead of their mind controlling the emotions. Therefore, let's go back to the Chassam Sofer. Kalem, destroy them. What is the greatest, deepest destruction a human being can have? So kaved, for various reasons, kaved, the liver, is described as a seat of sexual passion. That's the imagery Chazal use. The lev are emotions. The moach is the mind. When your attractions and your taivas rule over your moach, that is called destruction. That is the greatest level of destruction. Kalem. Because what that means is you use your moach in the service of your base emotions of kina, taiva, v'kavod. The real driving forces in your life are kina, taiva, v'kavod, and you use your moach to make money, to indulge in taiva. I mean, think about, for example, the entertainment industry, whether it's movies, computer games, whatever it would be. Now, the people in those businesses are very, very smart people, very, very bright people. They can figure out all sorts of things, amazing technologies, special effects, whatever it is. They're geniuses, some of them. But essentially, they're using their moach to feed the kina taiva v'kavod. The moach becomes subordinate to the kina taiva v'kavod. That is kalem, that is destruction. And that's Bilam's curse. Bilam's curse is, may you be a person whose emotions control their seichel. Kalem. I use my mind, I use my brain, I use my talents, but all of it to feed the baser part of myself. Now, interestingly enough, the opposite of kalem, if you reverse the letters, is melech. Melech is a king. What is a king? A king is not a ruler over territory. Moach, kolayos, or kaved, lev. The mind rules over the passions and the emotions. Not in the sense that you should be like an emotionless person, like whatever Dr. Spock in Star Trek, whatever it is, no feelings or whatever the story is. But rather, your moral sense, your sense of morality, your sense of conscience, your sense of values, your understanding of right and wrong, based on the Torah, controls, directs your emotional response to things, rather than the emotions directing the mind. And that's a melech. And indeed, Pirkei Avos says, Ezeyu Gibor, who is a heroic person, Hakovesh es Yitzro, one who can conquer his Yetzer Hara. But the truth is, Pirkei Avos is based on a pasuk in Mishlei that says, Moshel Barucho, he who controls and directs their spirit, is greater, Milo Chedir, from someone who conquers a city. That's a pasuk in Mishlei, and that is actually the makor of Chazal. If you look at the Bir HaGra to Pirkei Avos, you will see that what the Gra tries to do is every statement in Pirkei Avos, the Vilna Gaon tries to connect it to a pasuk. He says every teaching of Chazal was derived from a pasuk in Kisvei HaKodesh, and many of these pasukim are in fact in the book of Proverbs, the book of Mishlei. Okay, so you see there's a certain tragedy of Bilam, and again, it's a tragedy that we see over and over again in the world. And by the way, I am not making this dichotomy, the non-frum world versus the frum world. The truth is, as religious people, we struggle with it as well. Yeah, perhaps we formalistically keep mitzvos, which is a great thing, but we are not immune to kind of letting our emotions, letting our passions control our minds, instead of our minds, our seichel. I actually shouldn't say mind, because I don't mean just literally the brain, but I refer to the sense of right and wrong, the sense of values. I just read a little story about Rav Dessler. It was a very interesting thing. And by the way, many of you have heard of Rav Dessler, the author of Michtav Me'Eliyahu, Strive for Truth. That's really one of the most popular svarim on Jewish hashkafa, both in the English and in the Hebrew, and quite literally, it's suitable for every level, from, let's say, someone in Mechina to someone who's a Rosh Yeshiva or a Mashgiach. Like, everybody can get some valuable insights from Rav Dessler. But there's a very excellent biography of Rav Dessler. Rav Dessler as a person is not as well known to people. Jonathan Rosenblum, who writes many good biographies, wrote a biography for Art School of Rav Dessler. And again, I happen to be looking at it, and I'm learning things about Rav Dessler that I was not so aware of as a person. But I'll give you a little story of Rav Dessler, that Rav Dessler spent most of his career, the last years of his life, he was going to be in Eretz Yisrael, And although he was from Lithuania, but his main career, so to speak, was in England. He did tremendous things in England, unbelievable accomplishments there. And then he did unbelievable things in Eretz Yisrael too, just in the last decade of his life. But his avodah in England was concentrated in Gateshead, which is near the English-Scottish border up north, has to this day a very wonderful yeshiva, a kollel, teacher seminary. He was involved in all of those different things. So the story goes that one of the Chevrei HaKollel, one of his Talmidim, said he wanted to go to a certain flea market, Erev Shabbos, because he had like £1 to spend, and he wanted to see if he could buy something l'kavod Shabbos that would be really, really nice. Because, things were sold at cheap prices there. So Rav Dessler said, I'd like to go with you. He didn't understand why, but Dr. Dessler's whole family was not even with him. He was separated from his family during World War II. So he was all by himself, but he said, I want to go with you to the flea market. So they go, and the kollel younger man, the Avrech, sees like a beautiful candelabra that only goes for £1. So he says, wow, I want to get this. Rav Dessler said, I really like that. Would you mind if I got it instead? So he said, okay, all right, Beseder. Then he sees like a cup, a beautiful silver cup that he could use for a Kiddush cup. And he says, I'd like to get that. And Rav Dessler again says, I really like that cup, would you mind if I get it? And then there was a third thing, I don't know, a challah board or whatever it would be, and Rav Dessler again says, now, this Avrech says, for the first time in his life, he had never experienced this emotion at all towards Rav Dessler. He says, he felt a little angry. Like every time I want to get something, he takes it first, and he doesn't even have his family here, so he doesn't even have a Shabbos table. He eats at other people's houses or whatever it is. And Rav Dessler all of a sudden needs the Kiddush cup, and he needs the challah board, and he needs the other thing, the candelabra, the menorah. But whatever, he's kind of kavish his anger a little bit. Then right before Shabbos, there's a knock at the door, and Rav Dessler presents him with the Kiddush cup, with the menorah, and with the challah board. And he said, I wanted to get you a gift for Shabbos, and I want you and your family to enjoy this, in great happiness and joy. So Rav Dessler explains what he was doing. He said, I saw that when you saw these things, you had a great taiva. You had to have them. You had to have them. And I wanted to train you a little bit, that just because you have a taiva, you don't have to act on it right away. So I wanted to kind of disengage you from the notion of acquisition. Even l'shem shamayim, there's a certain, even though you're buying it for Shabbos, there's a certain taiva that a person has. And Rav Dessler said it's important to calm down the taiva, not to have this sense of, I gotta have it. So I wanted to take it away from you a little bit, and then, Baruch Hashem, I want you to have it. But you shouldn't be responding because of taiva. The truth of the matter is, Rav Dessler came from Kelm. Kelm was the great place of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter's Talmud Muvak, the altar of Kelm. And Rav Dessler was raised in Kelm, and he was a Talmud of Kelm. His father was a Talmud of the altar of Kelm. Rav Dessler was born after the altar died, but Kelm was in his blood. And the truth of the matter is, this was exactly the practice of Kelm, that when Bachrim got food packages or whatever, from their parents or whatever, they were not allowed to open, or even a letter from their parents, they were not allowed to open it for 24 hours. Because you don't act as a Baal Taiva, I gotta have it, I gotta see it. You wait. You calm down, and then you say, now I'm ready to experience this in a proper frame of mind. That's why they say, in Kelm, the minhag was that after a fast, they would serve fish with a lot of little bones in it. Why is that so? Because b'teva, after a fast, you've been fasting all day, you're very hungry. And when you're hungry, you tend to eat fast, ravenously. He says, we got to train you. You're not an animal. You have to eat. Yeah, you have to eat. But you eat with dignity, you eat slowly, you eat with refinement. So to force you to kind of be careful about how you eat, the fish has a lot of bones, so you can't really, swallow them, you choke on it, etc. This was a training mechanism. So Kelm was all about this idea of being very deliberate, being very thoughtful, not kind of, even for good things, not acting fast. Yeah, they say again. I'm reading these stories after stories in this book, and they're all kind of the same story in many ways. Rev Dessler is walking with somebody in a subway station in New York. He was in America briefly, and they hear a train coming. So his companion starts running to the train. Rev Dessler says, "Listen, if it's not this train, we'll take the next train." He says, "You don't run to things. Take your time, be deliberate, and things will happen in their right time. Don't rush. Don't hurry." This is actually what even combat surgeons say when they do emergency surgery on the battlefield. So they'll often say, how long does it take to stitch up an artery? He says, you can repair the artery in 2 minutes if you don't rush. Meaning you try to rush in the panic, you mess things up. Be slow, be deliberate, be focused. Your mind should control the emotions. We often get nervous. We often get, got to do something. And then what happens in life, even as a matter of practical life, we mess up. 2 minutes if you don't rush. If you rush, you're going to mess up and you're not going to get the job done in 2 minutes. You may not get the job done at all. The patient will die if you're rushing, right? So this notion of calmness. Now, I'll just end with a little story. Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, as a bacher, came to Kelm, like 14-year-olds or 15-year-olds, and he talks about a Maisa. The very first day he was at Kelm, it was a Kriyas HaTorah day, and the Gabbai didn't see a Levi or something, or didn't see a Kohen, and was going to call up a Yisrael, the Makam Kohen. And Rav Yaakov, as a bacher, notices that a Kohen just walked in, and he tells the Gabbai that, there's a Kohen, we have a Kohen. So after davening, the Gabbai said, thank you very much for pointing it out. You owe the yeshiva a ruble. He says, why do I owe the yeshiva a ruble? He says, because we have a takana that you're not supposed to look at the door during davening. You're not supposed to look at who comes in and who comes out, because you're supposed to be focused on tefillah, so I have to find you a ruble. Because, you don't look around, look around here, who comes in, who doesn't come in. Why should you even notice those things? So, Rav Yaakov said later about his experience at Kelm, he says he felt that every person ought to spend 6 months at Kelm, but then he added, but no more. he said it was like too hard of a standard for people. But it was really about a character build. And you can see in Rav Dessler's life that although it was many, many years since he had been in Kelm, he had gone to England before World War II, but all of these Kelm lessons and stayed with him, and he applied it in his interactions with people. But most important, this is the idea of the moach, is sholet al halev, because often our emotions are impulsive. We need to do something right away. And part of this is to calm down the spirit, so to speak. Have a certain yishuv hadas, and then you're able to do what needs to be done. And that's what a melech is. A melech is when the moach rules over the leiv and the kaved, rather than the kaved and the leiv.